Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode of Iblis Manifestations Podcast. On this episode, I'm joined by my friend Scott Taysom. He is the man behind the US black metal project Cloak. Him and I got to speak a lot about the various different aspects of Cloak, but also his inspirations and music, many of which we ended up having in common. And of course, we got to discuss a lot about the struggles of what it's like to be on the road, and a general, the path that it takes to be on a journey as a musician, and especially one within this particular subgenre. And aside from the more mundane aspects of this, what it truly means as your own personal trial by fire, really, to be going through this journey. So we got to discuss a lot of that, and there's a lot of very honest and very nuanced subjects that were covered on this episode, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. Cloak actually have a new record coming out, so be sure to go and check that out. And I'll include a link to that. And yeah, this was a very rewarding conversation to have with Scott. And as it turned out, he was already a listener of the podcast, which always makes things far more engaging, I would say. Before we continue with this episode, I would like to take a moment to bring your attention to my band Trivax's new album, which is called Iloa Burns Out. And this will be out via Cold Never Dies on the 29th of September this year. And our first single called Azrael is already out. So if you haven't heard it already, please, if you do have a spare moment, check it out and see what you think. And if you are also a fellow avid podcast listener, as I am personally, then I'm delighted to introduce you to the fellow Horsemen of the podcast apocalypse, if you will. And all of these fellow podcasts will be mentioned in the link in the description below. And this will, of course, include Into the Necrosphere, Everything Went Black Media, as well as the Solnox podcast, as well as various others, which I highly urge and recommend you to check out. So please, if you do have a moment to listen to those, once you are finished with this episode, feel free to check them out as well. So, and one last thing, if you're new to Iblis Manifestations, please do consider sharing this content, liking it, subscribing, and let us know your thoughts and any of your feedback, and if you enjoyed my conversation with Scott. So, yeah, that is all that I had to share with you before this episode, and once again, I hope that you will enjoy this one. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Scott Taysom from Cloak to Iblis Manifestations.
From the nether with your big boy, within realms of abstraction, we harness the power of and move against the people that governs the fool. I see the kiss of what lies beyond. I hold the flame of liberation.
Okay, Scott, good afternoon, and welcome to Iblis Manifestations, man. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks for having me. I've been a fan of this podcast for a while, as well as our guitarist Max, so it's good to be here.
All right, cool. That's always good to hear. I think I've followed Cloak around for maybe about a year or so at this point, and I think what you're doing is great with the band, and I'm very pleased to see, obviously, the progression, and how, especially with the new album, you guys have been able to come out there as much as you have. And I think that you can probably say this yourself, but I think artistically as well, the band very much feels whole with the most recent album you just put out there, Black Flame Eternal.
Yeah, man, I agree. I appreciate that. First of all, yeah, I think it really took a step up on this third album, and we're really proud of the first two, but I think we're just so much more proud of this third one. I think it took us in a direction where we needed to go and where we will be going in the future. So, yeah, kind of honed in on what we do best and amplified it even more. And yeah, I think it was a really good step up for us.
I think it's the third album's always a tricky one for a lot of bands. You know, it's always the one where either the most major shifts happen, or it's when the band either does their best or their absolute worst. You know, and you can make the examples of whether it's Metallica's Master of Puppets, or if it's Rammstein's Mutter. Even I know that was like a very weird record for them to make, or whether it's something like, I don't know, Sworn to the Dark, for example. So
Exactly.
yeah, I think there's always this special aura around the third record, and I think it's the one where by now you should have had the enough opportunity to be able to express yourself through your own vision more than anything, rather than simply just be paying tribute to what's already there, which is a necessity to some extent anyway. It was when it comes to the genre that we're doing, like Dimebag Darrell said, we're all just sharing riffs. It
Right.
is that at the end of the day, but I think that the third record is always one where you sort of get to express yourself at your most authentic, if you will.
Yeah, I completely agree. The records you mentioned, Master, Rain and Blood, Sworn to the Dark, Covenant from Morbid Angel. There's so
Mm.
many that are just monumental, pieces in bands' histories. And we really kind of had that mentality going into this third one. The third record to me is just such an important one. It, you know, just yeah, even just that number three, it's a serious number. It's not the second, it's not the first. You get some bands get their sophomore slump or whatever, which I never really experienced much from a lot of bands. I always like a lot of bands' second records, but the third is really kind of what, it's a shift or it defines them. Like even in Solitude's Sister
Yeah.
record like that, which was a huge shift, but arguably some of the best creative work to come out within the last 10 years. So yeah, man,
Probably longer than that, man. Sister was just fucking insane. I mean, I had Gottfried Amen on this podcast, and we talked about Sister, and it really is. I always say it's a masterpiece, and I heard it at the time it came out, and it feels even more ageless now when you listen to it. It's just such a powerful album from the very first moment where the acoustic guitar starts until the very end, where all you hear is just the guitar plug being pulled out, and then that's all you hear. It's just such a fantastic record from start to finish.
Yeah, I completely agree. I listened to that episode as well. It's really cool that you got him on. I would say, I mean, that record is kind of the reason Cloak really solidified. Me and the drummer were jamming already before, and we really just bonded heavily over that album. He burned it for me on a CD, and I wasn't really that aware of it coming out, I remember, and I thought it was just so strange and weird, and I like just kept listening to it. I was addicted to it almost, but upon first listen, I was like, what? This is so strange and weird, but I think I like it, but I just kept jamming it, and it was just, it became like soul penetrating in a way, as well
Mm.
as the first two Devil's Blood albums. There were such special albums coming out around those early 2010s, and I remember seeing the Wild Hunt tour with Watain and Solitude and Tribulation on their Formulas album, and I mean that was just
Right, cool.
life-changing show. Me and Sean, the drummer, were there as well, and we were just
Was
like
that in what, 2013 or something?
2013 November. Yeah, I mean 10 years ago this November. I mean fucking life-changing. Such a special show, because I mean I saw Watain for the first time on the Lawless tour, November of 2010, but just that package in 13 was something else. I was honestly most stoked for In Solitude at that time because that record had just come out. So it was so great to see them.
Yeah, I relate to what you're saying. I mean, the whole thing, like Sweden at that particular time. I mean, I guess it's not directly just Sweden, because I guess Devil's Blood, they weren't from Sweden; they were from Netherlands.
Dutch.
But
Yeah,
there was, yeah, but there was this sort of a thing that seemed to be happening around those years. There's obviously the famous Decibel tour, which I've talked about with numerous people on the podcast here, who have actually been either involved with it or attended it, and there seemed to be some very special magic happening around that time, that I actually I like to reflect on that, because I also think that I relate to what you're saying about seeing the show and it being life changing, because I kind of experienced a similar thing. I got to see Watain live for the first time on their last date of the Lawless Darkness tour, which was at Bloodstock Festival, and I was right at the front for that, and I was actually really looking forward to seeing them, but also I was really looking forward to seeing Behemoth, who were sort of my top band when I was growing up in Iran, as a teenager. They were like the band that I was like, fuck yeah, and obviously this, you got to think this was in 2012 as well. But just seeing Watain that day in August, 11 years ago from now, was just, there was something in the air. I was like, oh, okay, now I'm aware that music is not just music. There's something else that can happen here, and that was like my first exposure to that. So I would also class that as life changing to an extent, like you said.
Yeah, 100%. I think, I've heard Christian talk from Necrophire talk about it too. Just that era of what we're talking about now. There was something really special going on, and you mentioned Behemoth. I mean, the Satanist was another one that when that record came out, it was just like, holy shit, this is another level for them, and that was a huge record for me as well. There were so many cool bands. Vorum, the Poison Void record was really cool. Venenum's first album was so important to me.
Sure.
Still is. I mean, I fucking love that band. I wish they would do more.
There's also the Ascension record as well from 2014.
Yes. What something of the Dead, what was it called?
The name actually escapes me. I just remember the moth on the cover. That's why I refer to the year of when it came out, not the full title of the album. But that's a very powerful one as well, indeed. I
was obsessed with that. I remember Sean showed me that as well. The name's escaping me. But I mean, their first record was really good. So many cool bands. It's hard to name them all, but it's such a cool. Excoriate, it was, the project before.
That's right.
Yes. Even Jonathan Holton's side project Stench was really fucking cool. Just so many good bands.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it seemed to me that, like, as we enter the 2010s, this sort of, I guess, I don't know how to describe it, but this sort of plasticky kind of weird approach to black and death metal kind of shifted, and in a sense, I don't want to discredit anyone else, but I do feel like it all kind of started with Lawless Darkness, because as they went towards that direction, it almost feels like everyone in the genre, even if on the outskirts of black metal, even people in like more death metal side of things, took notice of that, and then suddenly you're hearing a lot more reverb on all the extreme metal albums, and then suddenly there's like all these stage props appearing everywhere, which is like obviously the depth of such a thing, the venomous depths of such things, goes a lot deeper than just the physical side of it, but you do see how that influence just sort of like bled through everything, which I think it's important to acknowledge the influence of that, even though it's something that happened in 2010, which is relatively very late to the game in the grand scheme of things, if you want to look at it.
For sure. Yeah, it was, I guess, that third wave of what they call the orthodox black metal that was happening with, between maybe 2000, 2003 or 4, like Onscopt and bands like that were coming out. Obviously Watain's like Cassis Luciferi album as well. And then it just progressed even more from there. But you're right. I guess it really kind of shifted gears from what was happening before and just the overproduced, plasticky kind of just like way too polished sounding stuff, kind of shifted around that time. And now I think we have almost like a mix of that. It's, you know, still a mix of the remnants of what was happening around that time, but then, you know, but then we have a little more of the polished stuff coming back. I was on Carl's podcast Sunday, and we talked about we just really don't like the sound when it just everything sounds really plugged in, like DI. A lot of times in drum machine style stuff, it's too fake. It's not organic enough sounding. And I hope that kind of goes away, because I feel like that, again, we have a mix of that. We still have the organic stuff, but then we have just kind of that, you know, shift into that more. You can tell when stuff is a one-man project. Basically is what I'm saying, you know.
I hear you 100%. I think a lot of that. I think that different styles of production serve different styles of composition and songwriting, and just different sounds of a band in general, you know. So I think the production aspect is purely one additional tool that you have, a very intricate tool at that, because there's so many different variations of it that you could execute. But I also find that having a certain approach to production just for the sake of fitting into a trend or an industry standard kind of like just defeats the purpose of this genre to begin with. Yeah. And I think that, you know, now that can apply to whether you want to sound like the first Burzum record, or if you want to sound like the newest, I don't know, let's name a very polished sounding black metal band. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, anyone. So it's kind of like, you know, it's just a mere tool. But I do agree that when you make things ultra processed, I think a lot of times bands do that simply just to hide behind the fact that there's a lack of chemistry as a band, you know, and I think this is obviously where a lot of drummers really get to show off their good side, you know, and whether they're capable of this or not, you know, is when you can hear how organic the drums are and whatnot. And I think a lot of bands hide behind this just to sound good on the record, and then it's only when you see them live that you realize why the albums sound as processed as they do. Is because they sound like shit. So you know,
show where it's just been like, fuck, this drummer sounds so bad.
Yeah.
And it sounds so good on the album. But yeah, no, that's something that is extremely important to us. You're basically only as good live as your drummer. So you know, I think Satir said in an interview, you know, there's nothing worse than the sound of a struggling drummer. And it's so true. The drummer is the one, especially in live music, the drummer is the one that carries the show in metal. Like, the guitars are going to get pretty drowned out, and it's drums and then mainly vocals, and then like you have the melody of the guitars. But yeah, man, I completely agree. And I think we toe the line somewhere. Like, we completely understand we're a modern band with pretty modern production, but we still wanted to sound as organic as we can. We wanted to sound like we are a band. As much as I love the early Burzum and early Dark Throne stuff too, but you know, that just what suits our music best is higher production for sure. But we don't want it to sound like every little drum thing was fixed and moved around, and you know, everything's on a grid. We don't necessarily want to do all that. It's easy to be a perfectionist when you're doing records now too with Pro Tools. I'm sure you can agree. Like you're like, should we move this or fix that, or my vocal part wasn't as good, and you can just splice and all that now. But you gotta try your best to really do the take, you know, the best that you can.
Well, that's actually a very valid point. One thing that I always remind myself of is think of what are the best extreme metal albums of all time. Well, generally they belong in the, you know, as far as death metal is concerned, at least, you're looking at late 80s, early 90s. And how were those guys recording? They were recording analog. So what did they have to do? They just had to perfect themselves completely. I mean, you mentioned, for example, Morbid Angel's Covenant. I mean, the fact that was recorded analog is just fucking ludicrous. Or any of their albums in their earlier years.
That's crazy, yeah.
Exactly, and there's just such a savage element to that. So for me, actually, to your point, when it comes to creating the work of Trivax, you know, and what we do in the studio, what I like to do is, obviously, you want things to first of all make sense, and then you still want this to be an somewhat audible experience for the most part. But one thing that I purposely did on this newest record, which we've got coming out in a couple of months, on that one, there's bits where, the vocals like are not perfect. In fact, like I'm kind of fucking up, or there's like little bits of like gasps of air, or actually a lot of the guitars were not all of them, obviously, but I would probably say about 40% of the album with the guitars, they were pretty much just one take wonders anyway. And this, a part of this was because I wanted to sort of capture that organic essence of what the band is like live. Like, yes, of course, here and there you might hear a couple of notes fucking up, or you might hear some things that might not be perfect, or some things that you'll only ever hear at that show. But at the same time, you're getting this vicious and savage fucking energy that's coming at you. And I think that's what makes it special. That's that's when you're living in the moment, because otherwise you can just, like go and watch a DVD at home or whatever, So I think that organic, that sort of like intentionally leaving in the impurities, I think only adds to the experience as far as I'm concerned.
For sure. And like I said, it's I almost have to remind myself of that, because it's a little too easy to be like, just clip that little part of feedback out or something like that. I mean, I think a great example again is that the newest Watain was recorded live and it fucking sounds like it,
Yeah.
It's extremely vicious. It's hard to pull that off too, because that's a pretty intricate record. It's, upon first listen, I was like, okay, this is not an easy listen. There's a lot going on here. It's a lot to digest. And now I think it's one of their best works, but yeah. I mean,
likewise. Yeah, I think the same, man. I think they really killed it with this one.
It's so good. And, it grew on me with the more listens as well. But yeah, I think recording, that's a feat in and of itself, is doing this kind of music live on record. I don't even know if I would want to mess with that. That's a tough thing to do. I thought about it before, but man, like even click, live, I don't even know if they use a click or not, but it almost doesn't sound like it sometimes. But
I think when you listen to a song like The Howling, I definitely don't think there is a click, because there's very obvious tempo drops here and there in that song.
Which is awesome. Yeah. I don't know if I could do that myself. That's a feat for sure. Have you done live before, or is it mostly just separate tracking?
Actually, our first album was live recording.
Okay.
Yeah, it's sort of like the way we did it was, it's sort of like semi-live recording. So I played the guitars, and then we had our old bass player, me, him, and the drummer were all in the room. So rather than have any click tracks, like none of the album was actually recorded to click track, apart from the song Saturn. Which actually I kind of feel like in a sense is the downfall of the record, but also at the same time it does make it very unique. Like there's not many albums that you listen to that will feel like our first record. I feel, it's just a very weird, bizarre record it turned out. But we recorded that in the room together, but then obviously I layered the guitars afterwards. Once we had the drums and everything down, obviously. So we kind of recorded that as a 3-piece live and then added everything afterwards. So yeah, we have done that, and I like the idea. I like the idea of, just sort of capturing that punk rock attitude, which is not exclusive just to punk rock. Of course, you can take that and apply it to a death metal band if you wanted to, and I think you can create a lot of really good magic with it. But whether any band is capable of pulling that off is a completely different story,
Yeah, and you mentioned punk, and I came from a punk background growing up. I played in like street punk bands and UK82 Discharge inspired bands. So that has, I think, carried over a bit to all of my musical endeavors after that, whether it was metal or crust or whatever. I think just having that DIY aspect and the aspect of a little bit of the live danger where we don't have to play to clicks on stage is sort of just in my blood from being a punk musician for so many years. And I think punk in turn is really, I think black metal was really a lot inspired from punk. I mean, Bathory loved GBH and Motorhead bands and Discharge and bands like that. And then, from there, it kind of Hellhammer and all that stuff.
I actually think, yeah, punk is an essential root of what's within the veins of black metal.
Yeah,
In many ways, even Mayhem, early Mayhem, you want to look at that. Okay, maybe it doesn't quite sound like the punk rock that you knew, but to me, it's in essence, it's like that same thing that you get with punk rock, but somehow a lot more darker and more sinister. So that's sort of like how I especially would look at Death Crush, for example. I think that's very much what that is. It's like a punk rock album that played too much with a Ouija board, you
for
know.
sure. Yeah, yeah. I always said that album was punk sounding as well. I remember it took me a couple listens to get into it, and then I finally got it. And I was still deeply into a lot of DB punk and stuff. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is like an insane punk album or something. So it kind of clicked more for me.
Right on. It just occurred to me as well. Speaking of which, with punk rock, our mutual acquaintance, shall I say, our friend Parso, who you used to be in a band together with called In Ruins. He actually sent me some of your songs that you guys used to play together before. It was very interesting. It was very cool to me to hear what it was that you were doing, obviously prior to what it is you're doing with Cloak. But I'm also curious as to how the two of you guys even met, because I know there's not many Iranian guys who would be into black metal and want to have a punk band. So how do you even end up doing that in Atlanta, of all places? I'm pretty interested in this.
Yeah. So two of my best friends are Iranian, actually, Artin Azimi and Parsa Garrett. So I've known Parsa since I was 5. We grew up in the same neighborhood, just elementary, kindergarten, probably met each other from school. We had a really cool, growing up in the suburbs of Georgia, we had a cool community of skater guys who were into wanting to play music by the time we were in middle school, and we were all best friends, literally grew up in the same neighborhood. So there was like five or six of us, and we started playing bands in 7th grade, 8th grade, punk bands. And me and Parsa, so Parsa wasn't in my main band at the time, but we always toyed around with little side things because he was always a really good guitar player. We all grew up playing guitar around the same time too, and we're all the same exact age, born in 1990. So we started playing guitar around 10 or so. And then so once I got to college and that middle school to high school band ended, we started getting into heavier stuff, more crusty or metal punk stuff, because we were getting into thrash and thrash metal and stuff like that as well, and even early forms of black metal. And so me and him and the same drummer who was in my other band and bass player formed In Ruins. And it was sort of inspired by Tragedy, a band like that, some Amoebics influence and bands like that. But yeah, and we went from about, I was probably 19. Yeah, started in 2009 up until about 2013 or so, when he moved away to go to grad school. But yeah, we did some cool stuff. That was my first. So In Ruins was definitely my first experience touring, when I was 20, 21. And it was also my first experience with down tuning guitars. We tuned to C standard, and that band taught me how to write melody. I didn't really mess with writing a lot of lead or melody things over rhythm in the past before. And if I did, it was really minimal. So me and him together really kind of shaped writing melody on top of, the riff. So I think a lot of that is carried over into Cloak. I think that band really was a foundation of many things for me. So yeah, even though it was short lived and it didn't get huge, big or anything, but yeah, it was a cool experience. But yeah, we were in that band for a while, and then he moved, and then I did some other bands with that drummer for a while, and then pretty shortly after is when I started doing Cloak, the early formation of Cloak with Sean the drummer and Max the guitarist. But yeah, Parsa is one of my best friends, one of the best people I know, and he's really kind of at the forefront of a lot of this Iranian liberation movement with, he's been on top of it since the tragedy last September and the protests that have been going on there. And I mean, really all my information about it basically comes from him and his photography page on Instagram. And, he helps run and organize art shows here in Atlanta that they donate a lot of that, the money to that, organizations that deal with that. And he's kind of one of those guys that can pick up anything and just be great at it. He's so talented. He's got an eye for so many things, graphics and interior design or photography. He's a great guitar player, has a really cool guitar collection as well. But yeah, he's one of my best friends, man. Like, there's about, I have, a handful or two of guys that I know I can call at any time, and he's definitely one of them. So I've known him for a long, long time.
That's so cool to hear, man. He actually, he was sort of, he's been sharing around our recent work as well. And I spoke to him about it, and obviously I expressed my gratitude, but I think it's great. I think what people like him are doing, just getting the message out there about what's actually happening over there, what's been happening. Because the thing is as well, like, obviously I know we're going off on a bit of a tangent, but just in the context of Iran, what we have seen since last year, that's always existed there. And what I'm referring to is, of course, the oppression of the people, and the way that the government just totally fucking suffocates people culturally, morally, and physically, and so on, and financially, you name it. And I think it's, or religiously at the top of it. And I think that, and I think that, it's sort of, I think it's good, like there's nothing bad that could come from, at the very least, raising awareness on this, so that's kind of like why I find it so important to try and spread our message. And I actually think that it's kind of helpful, like when you have something, it's like you're not just playing music to suit your own ego, or you're actually doing this for the sake of there's a higher purpose, that obviously you want everyone to understand and appreciate freedom. That's why I do everything. And I guess that's why we all do this, is to celebrate freedom and just to, be able to express ourselves. But I think it really helps having that sort of purpose, that it's not just about your own stuff, and then we can all come together in this and sort of create this sort of harmonious but also powerful movement of freedom, essentially. And I can see how, when at times that freedom is provided, it can be such a healthy thing. Because I was thinking about this when you're explaining how you guys were growing up when you were like 5-6 years old, and then later you had your own like communities, like skateboard communities. You could just be a part of that. And then you can get to sort of express yourself, form bands, make good friendships. And I'm thinking about that to myself and thinking that I had some kind of access to that, but it was sort of like you still kind of had to fight for it, like it wasn't like anyone was just passing it down. It wasn't like socially so acceptable to just go and do something like that, and I can see how healthy it is when you do have access to such things and you can form your own communities as a younger person, without anyone fucking telling you what to do, basically.
For sure. Yeah, because you were still in Iran at that time, correct?
Yeah, I moved out about 11 years ago. 12 years ago.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, goddamn, like totally different scenario for sure. Being in Georgia and in the United States as opposed to that is obviously so different. The moment that I saw that you were an Iranian, frontman for a black metal band, I sent it his way, so he loved it immediately. But I had to show him that. So, but yeah, man, that's wild.
Cool, man. No, I appreciate it. And listen, there's no demand for a special treatment here. Like I already said earlier, I think we all just kind of want to do the same fucking thing. It's not that complicated. Just want to express yourself. And I think I know this is probably ad nauseum for a lot of my listeners on this podcast, but I always say this, is that the beauty of what we all do with this music, with culture, with arts, is that as an artist, I find that the more you get the opportunity to express yourself, the more that actually allows you a perspective to get to know yourself in a way that you wouldn't have done otherwise.
For sure. And I think playing music that stands for, massive forms of a massive stance of liberation and freedom in that expression. And then obviously going into more of the spiritual side of things. I mean, what better way to really look in deep to your, inside yourself, with the music, like with an art form like this, it's just indescribable. Really, I think it's the best way to really look inwards when you're doing this style of music, especially any sort of art. But I mean, black metal or just heavy metal in general is a really, really special thing.
Absolutely, yeah. I think this genre, whether you're a listener or you're a performer, whatever it is, I'm an extremely superstitious person, and I don't believe in coincidences. And I think that when in my worldview, whether this is true or not, it's almost irrelevant to me. But in my worldview and in my observation of the world, is that those of us who cross paths with this entity, whatever this thing is that's behind black and death metal, it almost like that was meant to happen. Like whatever your path in this universe is, you come across that because that thing is supposed to show you something. Whatever that is, it's trying to tell you something, and you just gotta listen to it. And it's a very interesting journey, shall we say?
Yeah, I agree. And the older I get, the more I agree with that concept of things kind of are meant to happen for a reason in some sort of way, and you can almost trace the path backwards when you get to a certain point, like when you get a little bit older. Okay, so that time in my life I was looking into this type of stuff, and then that led to this and that led to that, and it's really weird. The smallest thing can set you on a path. The thing that set me on a path was a brother's friend had a patch of a band. I said, "What's that band?" And he said, "Oh, it's this." And then he showed me that, and then that got me into underground music. So it's, if he wasn't over that night, who knows what would have happened. But then again, we had, the Tony Hawk Pro Skater soundtrack. So that got most kids onto Motorhead and Iron Maiden and AFI and bands like that. But, it was a popular thing at that time. But yeah, I mean, at such a young age, just little things can happen that lead you to these things. And then you meet these people and you look back and it's like, how did I get here? This is kind of crazy,
Yeah, this is one of my favorite things to think about because, talk about a butterfly effect and how many of those it takes. Like sometimes we sort of, I think, lose touch with reality and we just sort of feel so dull and bored and kind of like, everything sucks. But then you take one moment to think about everything that's taken for you to just even be where you are and to be who you are. And it's just like, okay, all right, it's it's very interesting, I think.
Yeah, it could be much worse. Everyone's got it worse than someone else, I guess. And that, I don't know if that's the best way to be thinking about things, but I don't know. I try to, even when I have those moments of where I want to complain or whatever, get down, you got to just force yourself out of it if you can, and just really realize, if you're on the right path, you gotta be thankful and grateful for that. So, and I think a person like me or a person like you is, hopefully.
Yeah, well, I know that I am, and of course, we all have tough moments, but I make sure that that's not the case. You almost have to build a discipline not to be that way. I think
Right.
this is what I'm talking about when I say that, this thing finds us for a reason. It's because it is very difficult to be a musician. Your ego gets tested in a way that nothing else does. Like you face almost like private internal humiliations that, I put myself out there like this and no one gave a fuck. But that is probably also like one of the best things that can happen to you, because that sort of like releases you from that demand, that expectation that we have. Like once you've been a musician who's played in a room in front of 5 people and still learned to find empowerment and strength in that, then you can do anything and you'll never have any kind of shame, and you've got almost freedom mentally.
Yeah, man, nothing has beat me down more than being in a band that's trying to tour or trying to, make something of it. God damn, it is. You find humility in being in a metal band in 2023. There's lots of us, and we're all trying to do the same thing. Our first record did pretty well for us at the time. We signed a Season of Mist, and maybe that was a little bit of an ego boost. And then after that, it was the second record, and then COVID hit. So that's it beats you into submission a little bit. I've gained or I've learned to be a lot more humble over the years. I think you have to be, and you have to accept that things are just the way they are, and you need to get out there and push for it and grind and achieve the goals you want to achieve by just fucking doing it. There's a handful of bands that get lucky right off the bat and kind of have, they get amazing tours for their first couple of tours. But, we had a little bit of that at first, but it's not like that for us anymore. We really have to get out there and do, we got to grind. We're about to do a 5.5-week US and Canada tour. That's the longest I've ever been out. I'm sort of a homebody too. Yeah. So it's, I'm not like this tour road dog. I basically forced myself to be. I think there's a lot to gain from it, and it does make you a tougher, stronger person, and it teaches you about life in so many ways. But yeah, that's, you gotta just get out and do it. And again, nothing has really beat me down and tested my patience more than being in a band and trying to manage a lot of these things.
Yeah, man, I completely agree with you in that it is probably one of the most humbling things that you can face. But like I said, I think that sense of humility that it can give you, like when you literally put your heart out there in front of people, and obviously that's something that people can often respond to very positively. That in itself is something that can actually fuck you up really bad if you're not disciplined enough mentally, and then you sort of buy into your own shit. Because I've experienced this both ways. I've experienced this. I think we all have, and I think it's a good thing to talk about. Especially if there's anyone who's like a relatively new in doing this whole thing. I think it's really important to talk about how standing in front of a crowd, putting your heart out there, and then everyone's just kind of a bit like, okay, but then. They're sort of indifferent towards you, basically just killing yourself on stage in front of them. But then also when there's times where you're just doing what you would normally do, but then someone comes up to you and then they speak to you as if you're God, and then they totally like throw themselves at you. I think that's like almost just as destructive, once again, if you're not prepared to face that. And I think that there's this exercise in the futility of it. No, referencing Miguel, but there's this sort of mental exercise, I guess, that I think that's actually good for you, because I think so many people, so many musicians get completely broken by this, that they revert to alcoholism or drug use, or they just completely, once the tour is over, they just have to lock themselves away in a corner and not speak to anyone because they don't want the reality outside of a tour. And vice versa, like there's all these different aspects to this. But I actually think that if you teach yourself how to be disciplined enough mentally to deal with that, is probably one of the best things for you, because then it allows you to approach life in its entirety in a way where you just don't really give that much of a fuck what anyone thinks, and you just do things because you enjoy them. And I think that's a powerful thing.
Right. I agree with you. You look at so many of the I love 80s heavy metal and 80s American heavy metal as well, and what could be classified as hair metal or something. But you look at the way they were treated, and the amount of money that was put into them at such a young age, and their touring life, and then they'd get home and just basically drink themselves to death because they were so used to the party of it all, and their road lives were insane, and the shit that you could get away with back then in the 80s as well was a lot different than today. So they would become basically like depressed alcoholic people. And I think I've never drank or done drugs in my life, so I think it helps to have that sort of head on my shoulders. most of the guys in Cloak don't even, aren't really even party guys anyway. But yeah, I've never dabbled in it. I've always been more into the serious side of music and that nature of it all. But it's like what you said, you can't let the party and the sex, drugs, and rock and roll thing get to your head so much. It should be a positive thing, and it doesn't have to always be this downer situation. But yeah, I think a lot of people, when they get praised too much, it's not good for them. And you want to be appreciated. I've always said I don't really care about the praise. I just want to be taken seriously as an artist. And I think you could probably relate to that. I think in this realm, that's all
Sure.
I really want. Not for what we sink our lives into to be taken as some sort of lighthearted thing or a joke or something like that. And I think the fact that it can touch people is one of the biggest gifts I've ever received in my life is hearing people or even reading comments of how they feel about the record or what it's done for them or anything, seeing a live show. I don't necessarily let it get to my head in that way, but it's like, wow, all I ever wanted from when I was a young, or everything that inspired me from when I was a young kid was that type of stuff, these bands and these artists, and to be able to give that back is pretty incredible. Even if it is on a small scale, we totally understand we're still a really small band and everything, but yeah, it's like you said, it can go both ways, or you get up there and there's just no response. It sucks. And it's just like you're crushing. I mean, this is physically demanding on our bodies. Headbanging and screaming is not a very physically healthy thing to do. And to do it and to put everything into it and basically, yeah, like kill your body little by little for not a lot of return is not very rewarding sometimes. We've done full tours where it's been like that, just mediocre fucking shows every night.
Right.
It's just, yeah, no one really knows that side of things, though. They see an Instagram picture of a cool looking live shot. It's like, wow, awesome, these guys are living it. No, we actually just played to maybe 15 people and no one bought anything, and our guarantee was shit, so we're struggling to get to the next town.
And I
But yeah.
think this is exactly when perspective matters, because just like that, there would be some other kid somewhere, some other guy or a girl in a band who would dream just to have that 15 people at a show just so that they could say that they're on a tour. You know what I'm
Definitely.
saying?
Yeah. There's definitely those people that just want to be on tour. And that's another thing I need to remind myself sometimes is don't let yourself get so easily jaded. Because when you do a lot of tours and you're tired and there's bands that tour way more than us, but we are starting to tour a lot more. And it's sometimes on a bad night, it's, you're going to want to get down about it, but it's, you have the great nights that make up for it. It's like in life, not every day is the most exciting day ever, but then you'll have, maybe one awesome day, full day and night that month that makes up for that whole month.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's one thing I always say. I mean, Jan from Dissection, is always been probably one of my personal like biggest heroes in music, but also like just everything that he stood for. I was always really fascinated by everything that he did and his whole story, and but one thing that I always felt like I sort of disagreed with him was actually that he always said how live every day as intensely as possible. And I always thought you can't do that. Live every day the way it's meant to be lived, but keep the inevitable in mind. That's the way I personally like to approach that.
Right. Yeah. You'll burn out if you do that. I mean, it's like a workout. Do the most intense workout every single day. There might be one really intense one a week, and then the others around it are kind of maintenance. That's kind of, I've always lived a really, really moderate lifestyle, to be honest. I've always been into health conscious decisions with my food and, exercise or,
You just mentioned a minute ago saying that you've never drank or done drugs. Is this sort of like you've never even touched alcohol, or you just simply like don't do it at all? Like, how does that
straight
work?
Yeah, straight up. I've never been drunk. I've never drank. When I was a little boy, I probably tasted my dad's beer. That's the most I've ever had of drinking.
That's
Yeah, I guess
fascinating. You don't meet many
yeah,
people like that, right? What
especially in
prompted
metal.
this? I'm very curious now.
So me, straight edge lifestyle, which is weird in metal, and I actually don't even like that term. It's associated with kind of this weird kind of broy culture in hardcore that I don't associate with at all. And even in punk, straight edge was not a thing. But it never attracted me at all. I just never, liked it. And I don't care if other people do it. I've been friends with people that do it my whole life, and but yeah, I think, and then getting into bands like Minor Threat, and when I was really young, AFI, like me and Parsa were super into that band in middle school, and that guy didn't, he lived a straight edge lifestyle as well. So I've never been this preachy guy about it at all. Again, I don't even like the term straight edge. It's just an easy way to say that I've never, I'm drug free and alcohol free, and the party lifestyle has just never been my thing. But yeah, it's weird. It's definitely black sheep within the metal community, or rock community in general. Especially, like I said, in the punk community, there was a lot of drugs and alcohol in that lifestyle. But yeah, it just never attracted me. I never even thought about what it would be like at all, really.
I think that's really interesting, man. I mean, for the sake of clarity, I think most of the listeners probably already know, but I'm in the same boat as you. I have experienced pretty much most things that you can imagine, but pretty much for like the last 4 or 5 years, I've also been in the, like you said, not the best name, but also straight edge, actually.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I don't fucking drink at all. I actually, I've since stopping, I've actually really quite grown to dislike it. Now,
Yeah.
on the other hand, I do have a lot of admiration for psychedelics and their benefits for people. I do think they should be done in very controlled environments and in the right dosage for the right person. But generally speaking, yeah, I'm not so much into that. I never became a smoker. Again, like I said, I've tried everything. When
Yeah.
you're, and most people around me not only drink, but they do other stuff. My some of my best friends are relatively regular cocaine users, but it's just not something that is for me personally. In fact, I really don't like it anymore.
Yeah,
Um,
cocaine is
yeah.
big in Atlanta for sure. And then we had a fentanyl outbreak 2 years back, and it killed like 5 people within the close vicinity of our music scene. So it's just a wake up
Uh,
call. That was a really sad, couple of months. And yeah, I agree with you. I think psychedelics could work wonders for people. There is a part of me that does think, well, how could I say I don't want to do something or not like something if I've never even tried it? But how many people do you see say, I really got to get off of this stuff versus, man, I got to get on this stuff? You know what I mean? It's most people as they get older give up drinking and partying. Not many people grow older and say, I got to start. So I'm 33 now. It's probably not going to happen for me.
Well, that's a very, very valid point. The difference is here that with psychedelics, it's not something that you just get on. Psychedelics are generally one off experiences. I mean, I haven't had any psychedelic experiences for about, I think, close to 7 years at this point, more than 7 years. But I'm still rating them, saying that I think there's something that we should really look into more for more people, at least trying them once or twice. And the
For sure.
reason for that is because it's not a partying substance. It's not a thing of, oh, let me just take the edge off. No, it gives you so much edge that you don't even know what the fuck to do with yourself. But at the same time, it unlocks these things within your mind. And just with your general perspective, I think it makes you far more compassionate person. I've certainly become far more compassionate as a result of that. And I think that it really puts things into perspective, and in a sense, it does also make you ponder your own mortality a lot more, which I think is very, very healthy thing that I think everyone should have that perspective. And one of the reasons why I think our world today is a little bit fucked, is just the fact that we don't think about that enough times. And then if we think about it, we think of it from this consumerism perspective. rather than the fact of, oh no, I'm actually a person who has freedom of movement and can do things and can do all these crazy awesome things that you can actually do as a living person. So that's why I think psychedelics are very powerful gateway to just that mindset alone, which I think is very healthy for us and powerful. But also they're probably not the only way. I think there are still ways via extreme meditation and breath work and things that you can get there, but I think that those things you literally need to dedicate your life to them to really get proper results out of it. I personally think so anyway.
Yeah, and just to be clear, like what I was saying before about stopping and starting with age, I just meant like alcohol and more like harder drugs like cocaine or something. But yeah,
Sure.
like a drug like a psychedelic drugs, I really don't have issues with that. I mean, I don't have issues with any of it. I don't care what people do, but as far as stuff that would be, more in more of a consideration for me, if I ever even thought about stuff, yeah, it would probably be something like that. I can't see myself doing it, but even weed, it's like barely a drug at this point, whatever. But yeah, I have friends who trip somewhat regularly, and they've explained some really cool experiences to me. So I think there definitely is something to be said for that type of drug. It's hard to even call it a drug. It's something a bit different, a hallucinogen.
Yeah, I agree. It is different, but that's also very interesting to me. So for you personally, where do you sort of get your deeper experiences from? Like, let's say, do you have any kind of meditation practices, or even when it comes to something like creativity, how do you sort of tap into that realm of thought that's just away from the normal day-to-day life?
Well, I think things like just getting out into nature and taking walks and little hikes help immensely. I think meditation, breath work, like you said, or ritual is definitely important. And I did that a lot more during our first album cycle. And I think you can hear that sort of meditative, contemplative nature to that record on To Venomous Steps that has more of a like, not so much of an attack, but more of a contemplative mindset to it. And whereas I took what I learned during those times of ritual meditation and contemplation, and I used that to set it forth in my actual life. And I think you could hear that on Black Flame Eternal and even on the last record, The Burning Dawn. I think it's important to have that balance of the silence and then the action, because you can only read or study these things so much before you're just gaining insight or knowledge and then not really putting it forth. So I think it's extremely important to walk the walk and to put it forth in your life and to see those changes physically. Even just little things like wanting my mind to be the sharpest that it can, but also wanting my body to be the sharpest. So I picked up, exercising and doing weightlifting and things like that, which I know you do as well. So you can relate to that as well.
Sure.
And you can lift way more than me. I've seen your videos.
All right.
Yeah, I never got into like the super PR strength lifting or anything like that, but my guitarist is very strong, so he got into it as well. But yeah, no, I think that type of shit is extremely important with age as well. But and again, you asked with what inspires me. I think that even inspires me to just have that sharpness and that focus. There's so many things you can do, but when I'm in a creative period, I think I'm so dedicated to that and getting the record done and getting the songs done for that time period. And whereas now we did that, and now we're focusing on the live situation and the touring. And so it's a different sort of focus. Now it's like, okay, we got to get all these merch designs. Okay, we got to print all this shit, because me and the guitarist print everything with the shirts for the tour.
That's a smart idea. Cool.
Yeah, he works at a screen printing shop, and we have a little screen printing side business together. So
awesome.
yeah, the overhead is a lot cheaper doing it that way. So, it's that sort of mindset. It's almost like business, getting, figuring out the van. We had to take a van to a mechanic friend to get it fixed the other day. So I'm not in that creative mindset now. I am in a different sort of way. But when I'm in that creative mindset with the record writing, it's a lot different, and you kind of have to sit yourself down and do that sort of focus or that nightly practice, whatever it may be, or just being in a routine of some sort. I think I'm a pretty routine person.
I actually totally relate to that, man. I think you've got probably the best balance you could have for that. I think, yes, I agree. I mean, first of all, just a disclaimer here. I don't lift that heavy. I'm not that strong, man. I maybe bench maybe just over 2 plates or something. That's it, man. I've never been that strong.
But you made a huge transformation, because I've seen your before and after, and I was the opposite. I've always been extremely skinny my whole life. So I went from about like 142, 145 to about 170 or so.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to think what pounds are. I think in kilograms. A little bit of a cultural barrier here.
I think you froze for a second there. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just trying to think. Yeah, I think that's pretty good, man. Yeah, for me personally, it's the transformation really more than anything. But also it sort of taught me like, oh wow, once you can do that, you can pretty much do anything, and I kind of applied that into music. And I think you just said something which I think is very valuable. And it's that you said that when it comes to the external execution of what it is that you do with the band, you sort of treat it as a business. And I actually am a huge fan of this idea, and I didn't always used to, because there's this sort of stigma attached to that in black metal. There's this almost weird, if you think about it, it's this weird communist fucking mentality where it's like, you're not allowed to grow outside of your comfort zone. You're supposed to stay the same level as everyone else, and
Yeah.
and I don't like that. That's not how this. What the fuck is the point in that then? Well, then we all may as well do exactly the same thing, and just have no substance to it. Like the whole point of it is that this is your own personal journey of something, and you get to share that with the world in a valuable and respected way. And this. So what I mean by that is that you don't want to be. Basically, well, what I'm saying is that you want to do your music and you want to get the most out of the creative expression of it. But also at the same time, if you truly want it to be successful in terms of logistics and things like that and social media management, the best you can do is treat it like a business and view yourself as an entrepreneur, because that's how you will then get to prioritize things in the right way. Because otherwise, then you're just an artist who doesn't want to speak to anyone. You're creating music, and that's fine. You don't have to do interviews. You don't have to do these things. But how do you think people are going to hear your music, which is what you want to happen in the first place anyway, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think I remember Glenn Danzig said in some old interviews, like, if you didn't want to be in a band if you say you want to stick in the underground, just play in your garage the whole time. If you're on stage, you want to be in a band and you want people to listen to your stuff. So stop lying. But I think I think I agree. And the word business has a taboo nature to it, because it's not, it's money or whatever. But it's not just money. We're not making fucking money from this. Let's be real.
Yes.
Very few bands that can. You can make more than you used to. We used to lose money on tours, so that's nice that we're not anymore, but it's not pulling in a ton. But I think we have all the tools to do it. And as nasty as social media can be these days, it's also very useful. It's done wonders for spreading our music. Like, we can't lie that being online and YouTube and Spotify and Instagram has helped grow the band immensely. And metal definitely has that strong aesthetic to it. So I think a thing like Instagram, where there are pictures, you can kind of get that message out there of what you want your band to look like and be viewed as. And yeah, I mean, there's so much that, because I actually have a video background as well. So I did all our video editing for the music videos. So there's that too. Cool. And we try to really take all of our skill sets and, put it into what we can. And like you said, treat it as that kind of business mindset, but doing it in the cheapest way possible. You know, I do a lot of the graphic design for the t-shirts and all the music video editing, like I said. So that saves thousands and thousands of dollars, and Max does the printing and I help him with that. So as much as you can do, I think I heard the guy, it might've been on your show, that the Hell Ripper guy, he kind of said the same thing. He's like, learn as much as you can outside of music and put it back into the band, because we have all these resources, all these ways of showing it online. If you can do it yourself, most of it, then you should do it, because it's going to save you tons, and it's going to be great promotion the way that you want it to be. You know, sometimes a label or whatever, you know, will do something, or I'll see a flyer made by someone else. I'm like, God damn it, I wish I could have made a flyer because I don't like this flyer or something like that. But
Right. It's funny actually that you mention James, because I was literally just thinking about Hell Ripper as you were talking about that, and thinking about reflecting on my conversation with him, and that's exactly the point. You know, like there's so much stuff that you can learn to do, and at the end of the day, it only serves your music, and the better you get at these things, the more you can sort of just tailor your art in the way that you want it to be performed. You know, like you said, I do a similar thing with like shirt designs and stuff like that. You know, I always, you know, either come up with my own designs, or if it's commissioned work, I always work closely with the artist, you know, to make sure that they get the idea that I've got in my head, rather than just buying something and then slapping our logo on top of it and that's it. You know, that's never satisfactory to me, you know, and I always want our art to be something personal rather than just a product, which I'm sure is the same for yourself. I'm sure it's the same for James from Hell Ripper. DG from Miss Thurming I also had on here, and he said the same with just his studio work, because he's basically like recorded and made all of their albums, you know, and I think it's really valuable to be able to do that, because, you know, there's this sort of old leftover perception that we might have from back in the day, where you can sort of view bands how, you know, like, oh yeah, a label would just give a band $30,000 just to record their debut album, and, you know, which is just like that is just fucking unheard of in our world. You know, and I think that, to me, it's sort of like, it's not healthy to think about things that way, to even think that that exists, because it makes you expect things that are unrealistic. You know, the best you can do is be able to create your own art, put it together, package it the way that you want to package it, and just understand that everything in life is a skill. So the more you develop your skills, the better you're going to be able to express yourself, regardless of how precious you think that core part of your expression really is. And that's what's really going to make the difference at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, I noticed that you did graphic design as well. I think, did you have a page that I might have come across, maybe like a separate graphic design page?
Yeah, I do. I do a lot of. Generally, I actually mostly do gig posters, and it's called Devil's Ink. That's where I do most of my work, and I don't even really post all of them. I just kind of do the commission work, and I need to make that more active. But I also, basically, any sort of unique poster you've seen for Trivax shows, that's all been my own work. Some of our T-shirts, like the Eastern Death Magic stuff, you know, with all the Arabic writing, that's all my own work, you know. And to me, I think that's very important, you know, just layouts, things like that, very subtle things. Like, there's a lot that goes into it, but also I feel like the more you do that, the more you're taking ownership of what it is that you're doing, which is obviously, it's beneficial from a financial perspective, but also I just feel like it's that extra thing that when the audience connects with that, they're connecting with a different part of you rather than just what notes you played on an album. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I do the same thing. I also, any unique flyer that you see for us is done by myself as well. Since
Killer.
probably I learned more about it on the first album, like really getting going on that stuff. So yeah, I'm in the same boat as you. I completely agree. And if you can have someone in the band to do that stuff, it's so beneficial, and it kind of puts your own unique branding. Because I mean, a lot of this stuff is branding, that the way you want your band to come across, especially in such a visual genre like black or death metal. It's always been so important. I love flyers and posters and tour posters. So You know, and again, I come from more of like a cut and paste background from punk. Like I used to make punk zines and tons of flyers by literally cutting and pasting, making it look all old and Xerox. So I
That's really
take
cool,
that.
man.
Thanks. I take that kind of concept and put it towards the digital flyers that I do as well, and try to make them look, you know, a certain way. But I think that DIY aspect will kind of always be there. But yeah, I totally agree with you about doing your own stuff like that. And again, it's subtle, and maybe no one will even care or notice when you do your own flyer, but at least you know that it's there and it's the way that you want it to look.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And nothing beats having a fucking shitty poster for a gig that
That's
looks like
so
it's
so
yeah,
bad. Yeah.
yeah.
God,
It
we've
looks
had a
like someone just fucking chewed on a bag of Skittles and there's shit all over this fucking paper, you know. It's not great.
Yeah, it's so bad. It makes me and the other guys have just been like, God, is this really the flyer? We've been so annoyed at some of the ones we've gotten, but like, we'll usually make our own on the side. If it's really fucking bad, we'll do like our own tour poster or something. Luckily,
Same.
luckily a lot of the tours we kind of have added on dates, so we can like, you know, do our own flyer as well, and it won't be a dickhead move or anything.
No, I actually think that's necessary, man. We've had to do that. We've only had to do it in the UK, which sort of should tell you a little bit of something. But you know, it's I think it's actually very important, and there's been times where sort of the other bands pick up on the poster that you've made, and they're like, "Oh yeah, this is better," so they start sharing the poster that you've made, and then it just makes the event look better to everyone else, even though it's the promoter's job. You know, it's not to like overshadow them, but sometimes, you know, you gotta, it's your show, you know, it's your moment. You've worked hard for that, you know, and you're not just gonna say yes to any show. So if you've agreed to do a show, then you want it to be at the right level as much as you can. And I think gig posters are a very underrated part of this. I actually learned this from, you know, just my initial inspiration of this was probably just Watain, when around I think early 2000s they started making their own flyers for, I think they did it for, I think it was Sonisphere Festival or something, where they used like Slayer's old logo and Motorhead and stuff and Sepultura. And I remember seeing that and thinking that's a really fucking cool idea. You know, we should do more stuff like that.
We have the same exact inspiration. I remember it's that poster and all the ones that Eric screen printed and was selling. I mean, I know
Yes.
exactly what you're talking about. I think Max actually owns that one you're talking about, the screen, and then I have that red one from the New York Bazaar show, whatever that venue was
In
called.
Brooklyn, I think 2014 or something.
Yeah,
That's cool, man.
and on it. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I love. I mean, he's got to be one of the best graphic designers in metal, because it just looks so. All the detail, if you really look into it, is insane, and it looks cut and paste, and maybe a lot of it is. It looks kind of has that old zine Xerox type of thing to it. But yeah, I think that's super important that he started doing that and putting that out there, because the whole just purely digital thing, it just never looks that great for this, at least for our music. You know, a band like Behemoth, they're a little more sleek. They want to have something a bit more, just something like their art is also, their art direction's incredible as well, but it's different. You know, it's not so Xerox cut and paste looking. And then I think we're almost somewhere in between. You know, I think we have some of that cut and paste look, but then we also kind of have some more of the sleeker, more modernized designs as well. And I just think that's where Cloak is in general. We're really, really keen on honoring metal tradition, but also realizing that we're a modern band. You know, we're not trying to look or sound too old, but I think the honoring certain aspects of rock or just metal tradition in general is super important to us. You know, whether it's the way we look on stage or perform, or the way our art looks, or even just the way we kind of incorporate a lot of solos and leads into the music. But yeah, kind of a tangent, but I know what you're talking about with the design.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think it's that's actually cool as well. I mean, another thing that you mentioned here as well was just what you were doing with the videos as well, you know, and the fact that obviously, you know, you still did those parts yourself. I think there's something to that, and you know, like talking about the cut and paste part of things. I think that again, this is I would love for there to be some really serious scientific research into this, and perhaps there is, and I'm not aware of it. But one thing that I'm almost well, I am certain about this is that when you hold something in your hand and when you look at it with your eyes, to the point that your eyes make contact to the surface of something, I feel like with our brainwaves, we charge things somehow, with
Yeah.
items, with like a letter that you give to a loved one, or a box of dead rat that you might leave at a morgue gig, which is a different story that I will tell you that one of my friends did.
Heard the story from Christian from Necrofire. He's not the one
Excellent.
that did it, but I know the
Okay, so
story.
you're aware. This is, like this guy is the most, not Christian, but the other person in question is the most name drop person on this podcast ever. And I'm not going to mention his name, but we know exactly who we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I know that
And
story. I actually like Mark. I'll be honest. I like Mark as well, but
yeah, that's fair enough. But my point is that it's the when you do stuff like that that's in person, that's physical, I feel like you're charging it, like that's why one thing I like to do is when I'm corresponding with friends of mine in bands, I always like to write and send handwritten letters because I feel like that contains a part of you. That's why I like the idea of autographs. It's not this rock star thing, but it's the fact that it's something personalized for just that one person. It's your letter to them. Same as when people order merch. The fact that you, as the composer of the song, I don't know if you sort out your own merch. I'm going to assume you do, but just even the fact that you print them yourself and you're holding this T-shirt in your hand, the person that buys it, it's just the thought that, oh yeah, this isn't just made in some factory. The guy who's actually in the band, who's written the music, which I'm trying to support, has also helped create this T-shirt or has like sent it to me directly. And I think there's a lot of power to that, and that connection is probably the main reason why we do any of this, really.
yeah,
And I think that's what makes it really special.
yeah, I completely agree about the physical side of things, and it's almost something that's been lost with obviously the digital platforms and everything like that, and YouTube. Yeah, I love physical items. I mean, I have DVDs and VHSs and tapes and records and all that stuff. And then still, I've always been a collector, and I've kept my CDs even from middle school on, even if I don't listen to a lot of them. I just am like highly sentimental to a fault. Sometimes, like my friends will laugh at me. They'll be like, "You still have this or that?" And it's just like these items. But
By that, I'm
yeah,
guessing you mean the new metal releases, right?
the new what?
I'm guessing you mean the new metal releases by that, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, I was very into Corn
Yeah.
back in the day. Yeah. But yeah, I'll just have these like funny ass things that only my friends would know about. But yeah, I'm with you on that. I think yeah, having something physical, and then especially something that the band has touched or put their blood, sweat, and tears into, whether it's a screen printed gig flyer or a shirt, or if you sign a record, that I totally understand why people at shows want you to do that type of stuff. I never was huge on doing it myself, but I totally understand why a lot of those people want that, because it makes it even a cooler collector's item at the end of the day.
Yeah, but I think it's, I mean, first of all, on the sentiment thing, we are fully on the same page. I have so many things in my collection, whether it's CDs, or like stuff like you said, I might not even listen to nowadays, but it still holds a powerful value to me. And I think, there's that sort of, like I said, there's that consumerist sort of angle to it of like, oh, it's a cool collector's item. But to me, it's like, and that's great. That's awesome. Like, look at the price of a fucking first pressing LP of Mayhem's Death Crush, right? But yeah, but at the same time, I think what's cool about it is that connection. Is that this is something that it's almost like, I think. Now, hear me out on this. I don't know if you've had similar thoughts or not, but to me, I find that the pondering of one's own mortality is a very healthy thing.
Yeah,
Obviously, you don't want to walk around all day, every day, just thinking about death, but I think it's a very powerful thing to have in the back of your mind because I think it influences your actions generally in a very positive way.
yeah,
Um,
I
yeah,
totally agree.
yeah. Providing that you're not a cynic of, oh, why do anything mindset, like I don't buy into that anymore. Uh,
Yeah,
but uh, but I think it's a very powerful thing to have. So to me, it's almost like with art is it allows you the opportunity to almost become a parent and in a way of not exactly raising a child, but it's almost like you're passing on your genes, but in a way that's not biological and rather in a way that is through CDs and LPs and t-shirts and experiences and emotions more at the mostly at the core of everything. And it's that you're passing on these emotions to other people and other people get to hold on to these emotions even at a time when you're no longer here. And I
yeah,
think that's at the absolute core of why it's so rewarding as an artist to make that connection with your audience.
yeah. And I think that's the magical element in music, especially in a music that is, has its feet in the occult. I think having that's a huge magical element, to be able to pass a physical thing that carries emotions and inspires another's emotions. And, you know, yeah, and not many people can have something that is there long after they're gone. Not from a like an egotistical standpoint or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, it's 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 pretty cool that a piece of art or a piece of music can basically live on for as long as, for the rest of eternity or whatever, until someone burns them all. But uh, yeah, it's definitely, I agree with that as well. And I definitely agree with thinking about your own mortality and having a sort of memento mori. And I think that's another important aspect of black and death metal is that reverence of death in that certain way, you know not looking at it as just some cool thing to sing about, but you're looking at it as something to respect and take seriously and know that you need to do what you want to do as much as you can in the short time that we're here, and really, empower your spirit the most that you can before you go, because at the end of your life you want to know that you did everything that you could or that you wanted to do.
Fuck yeah, man. Absolutely. But also, I think a lot of these thoughts, like I said earlier, I know this, we keep coming back to this, or at least I do, but I think it's worth mentioning. And it's that, how I said that this whole music journey makes you really get to know yourself. Just
Yeah.
the idea that obviously this is something that ideally you want to do when you are younger, because
Mhm.
it's when you're younger that your body holds up, you going on stage and fucking headbanging and moving around like a fucking maniac for 40 minutes, and then afterwards everything just fucking hurts.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then when you're doing that on a tour and then there's only like 10 people there, these are things that do actually make you sort of question your mortality. I'll not question it, but ponder over it that, oh yeah, I'm
Yeah.
doing this thing, all my time, all my energy, all my effort is going into this. Fuck, but then that in itself can then be a powerful thing, because then you can think, well, all right, well, what else would I be doing? You know?
Yeah. I've thought about that before too. It's like the times I do get down about it. Yeah, I mean, what the fuck else would I've already had this in my life for 20 years. So I know that if I went without it, I wouldn't be a satisfied person. I know that.
Mm,
It's people like us have to create. So we'd be doing it anyways. And to have
yeah.
people support us is just the icing on the cake, really. It's, to have that support is the best gift that you could receive, but you're going to be doing it anyways. The older you get, the more you've seen it, people drop like flies though, like out of the music scene. About 26, 27, 28 is when people start to maybe get married and have families, or get really hardcore jobs that they just can't leave anymore. And when you're doing it past that time, you start to feel a little bit weird sometimes. It's like, man, I'm like the last guy standing here out of my, group of friends growing up. So it's also kind of a weird, like lonely place in a certain way. You feel a little, yeah, it's hard to not feel like maybe immature sometimes when you're doing this type of stuff. But I think there's a lot to it that people don't see. And like we've talked about, it's given us maybe a business mindset that is invaluable that we couldn't learn working some shitty job. It's given us a mindset of persistence that we wouldn't have gained from anything else. So there's so much strength and, things that lift you up from doing this that a lot of people don't have. But it's a weird place to be in at my age. And yeah, people start to drop.
Yeah. You touched on something very powerful there, and it's how lonely it can be. And I think that's very true. That's very true. And that's, again, another thing that it teaches you something that you would have never known otherwise. And it's like, they always say that the loneliest job in the world is the work of a taxi driver. Why? Because he's driving around all day and he's talking to all these different people, getting to know their story. And then afterwards, after 10, 15 minutes, however long, that person walks away and then you never see them again.
Right.
And I feel that as a musician, that's actually very similar, except that you get to stand in front of however many people, perform your music, especially when you've got a good show, and then, like, let's say you've got, I don't know, fucking however many, like you got hundreds of people in there, and then you fucking go on stage and kick ass, and you have that expression, and then when you come back, and then you go, and things calm down, and then you're just in your bus bunker, and all you got is silence.
Yeah, it's very weird. It's an extremely weird situation of high and low, as on tour especially. But then again, like a good show like that can hold you over for a month or something. Like you still feel the power from that experience. I mean, I'm sure you played, like a festival show or something that was huge. And like we did Hell in the Harbor Festival, and the room was a big room, and it was probably one of our biggest shows. And it like held us over for like a month. We were like, that was such a good show for us. And you have little experiences like that, but it's just, you're here and then you're just here. And most of touring is here because you only get 30, 40 minutes of up there. So most of touring is it's downtime, sitting in a van all day. It's not my favorite thing to do. But you got to get to the next city somehow.
I appreciated how candid you were earlier when you were saying that you don't actually enjoy being on the road and you kind of prefer to be at home. And I think that's, it's not often that you get to hear that, but it is, I think it's actually good, because like so many people would think, oh, I just want to go on the road and then stay on the road and never come back. But really, a lot of that I also feel is a matter of running away from responsibility. Everyone's always trying to run away. Like if the biggest lesson I ever learned in my life, one of them anyway, is that the more you're trying to escape that reality, the more you're making it a worse reality for yourself. So sometimes, life, there's this, obviously we can get into the really deep end side of it, but just on the surface, when you observe the Saturnalian nature of our reality and the matrix that we live in, there's this aspect of, the more you avoid the game, the more you're just wasting time and the game just becomes more difficult. But the moment that you face the game and do the things that you don't really want to do, that's when you then actually start to get results. And then the things that you want to see happen will actually start manifesting. And I think this is an extremely crucial thing to understand about I'm not talking human society, but universe as a whole.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, like you said, even to just break that down, people who kind of go on tour just to escape something, I think you're not going to find any sort of success or anything that way. I think you need to have the balance at your home life, whether it's alone or with someone else. mine's completely alone. When I'm at home, it's just me and my dog. And then when I'm on the road, it's around people all the time. So it's different. And I enjoy a lot of aspects of touring, but there's a lot that I don't like sitting in a van all day. I really don't like that. I like to be able to be, exercise and stuff at home. So it's such a different lifestyle. I'm not like a super late night guy. So when I'm on tour, my life basically shifts, it turns around. But I think that's important. And if I were to just sit at home and have my routine at home, then there would be no growth there. I think being out, like I said earlier, and doing those things, causes you to have a different perspective and appreciate the things at home more. But like now I'm a little stir crazy. I'm ready to get back out there again. So it's like, there's that balance, and you almost appreciate tours more when you're home, because you can look back and say, man, fuck, we just did that. That was a long time to be out. Some nights we were tired. There were some weeks that were just shitty. The van broke down, but you have a sense of accomplishment after you do it. And yeah, I think running away from problems and just doing a thing to do it it's not going to lead to the best outcome. There has to be a mission. We've always been really goal and mission oriented, I think, when we do our touring and stuff like that.
100%. Yeah, I can relate to that, man, for sure. I think what's crazy is also that the one very weird aspect of life is always that memories always seem more powerful than the experience itself.
Yeah, that's so true. Because again, I'm a pretty nostalgic person and sentimental person, and you almost romanticize about certain things in your earlier life. Like,
sure,
I've had just this weird nostalgia for my really younger, like middle school years, the past couple of years for some reason, because that was the I relate more to my middle school self who was discovering underground music more than I do with like my college self in recent times. I don't know why, but
that's interesting.
I think because when I was in middle school, you get into bands that are like the bigger bands, and when you want to be, like a rocker or whatever, and you want to stand on stage, you want to be in front of big crowds. And then I think the more I got into underground punk and stuff like that, you didn't really care about that. You were just like, I just want to play shows for my friends and house shows and anything like that. And that was cool too. But I think now the older I get, it's, you want to play bigger shows. So for some reason, I relate to my middle school self more than my 20s self. It's very weird, but
that's actually really interesting, because I feel like I relate to that as well, because I feel like, you go through a period, especially, for me, in my case, like my early 20s, I'm sure compared to a lot of other people, probably not that bad. For me, it was really, really tough years in those times, up until maybe I don't know, fucking a year or two ago, but
it's a weird age.
Yeah. You and I are roughly about the same age anyway, but I think for me, it was just this weird fucking thing of you get so jaded, that when you're going through that experience of just trying to, what I'm talking about, when you're going through those kind of soul crushing situations where you're fucking going on stage, and putting your heart out there and then no one gives a fuck. That kind of makes you jaded, you kind of get bitter, you kind of start hating other bands for no fucking reason, and, stuff like that. But then it's sort of you learn at the end of the day, okay, no, hang on. Each person's journey is their own, and I've got mine. This is a lesson for me. You can get better. And then the more you start thinking like that and then become positive about it again, I know exactly what you mean, because I now relate more to my 14, 15-year-old self than I have done in the last few years. I actually think it's really cool that you brought that up, because I relate to that more. That sort of that sense of excitement, that sense of, oh yeah, we can really do something here, rather than, because the only thing at the end of the day, right? Think of it like this. The only thing in the world that can truly stop you is always only yourself, by giving up.
Yep. And man, this is my most honest interview to date, but I remember, so I relate to that a lot. And I remember at about 24, 25 was kind of a weird transitional period. Like I moved out of where I was living with some friends. I moved in with a girlfriend. We broke up. And it was just like a weird. So I started living alone. And I just remember and my bands, my kind of bands at the time weren't doing much. And I remember telling my main drummer and one of my best friends at that time, I was like, man, if I can't do a band that's gonna like go somewhere or have something important to it, I'm gonna quit music. I don't want to do this anymore. If it's just this pointless thing, everything feels pointless. I was pretty down. It was kind of like 25, 26 were kind of like downer years, but those were, but that same year, 25 is when Cloak, really got going. Because we started officially in 2013, but we had sort of a hiatus. And then in 2015, when I was 25, we really, like around my 25th birthday, we really started going. And that was some weird thing because I was like, if I can't do anything that's going to be important for me, I'm going to stop. And then within like a couple months, we did Cloak and we started writing. And then we somehow picked up this weird steam like locally. And then like a year later, Season of Mist was interested in us. And then we got that first record deal. So it was like this weird transformation. And it was almost like that Negredo period where it's, you kind of have to, melt yourself down. And I was pretty down. I was like, this sucks. But then, it started to get better from there. And I think I kind of became who I am now around like 27 or something, within the past 6 years or so, I've really kind of been the same, from that maybe 26, 27 age, and just became more myself and more confident in what I needed to do and more into a certain lifestyle that I have now. And, you grow up and you get more of a head on your shoulders about certain things. And, but yeah, those early 20 years to about 25 is always a really weird phase in life. But yeah, there was that time where I had to really like make a choice. And again, that's another thing to add on your point of who you cross paths with, because I didn't really even know Sean, the drummer, that well until we started like really getting into Cloak. And he was just this kind of like random dude I know who played in a lot of hardcore bands back in the day. And then we kind of bonded over this style of music that we were into together. But he was a father and he had a family. And I was like, there's no way this guy's going to be able to do, what I want to do with music. And somehow we made it work. And, so yeah, it's been a really interesting journey, but I think it's, again, the way that everything lined up was the way it was supposed to happen somehow. But it tests you a lot of times, but if you have a good group of guys and everyone's in it for the same reasons, then you could do something with it, I think.
Yeah, man, for sure. I think that's a very powerful thing, and I think it's, like you said, it's very important who you cross paths with in life, and to our thing earlier, it's all the butterfly effects that it takes to be where we are now. So, yeah, man, it's very good, and I'm very excited, I'm very happy to see how well Cloak is doing. I enjoyed both of the videos that you've put out for the new album so far, and I'm excited for everything that you guys are gonna have coming up. Really, so just to sort of wrap things up here, this has been very enjoyable, man. First of all,
yeah, thanks a lot for having me on.
Yeah,
This is awesome. Yeah, thank you.
It's my pleasure, brother. What have you guys got coming up? You mentioned earlier about a 5-week tour of the States and Canada that you guys are doing.
Yeah, so Saturday we have Puerto Rico. We're just doing a one-off show in Puerto Rico. That should be interesting. And then we have Mexico next week, which is 5 dates, starting on Wednesday of next week, which is, I'm not sure when this podcast will air, but I think it's the 10th through the 15th or something. And then about 2 weeks after that, we start a tour with Uada and Ghostbath in US and Canada. And it's about 5.5 weeks. So it's a pretty long one. And then we are working on something that's just East Coast and Midwest, sort of a headliner with another really cool band that I think people will be pretty excited for. That'll be like a 2-week thing right before the holidays. And then that'll be it for the rest of the year. I think there's one festival in December we're going to do. That's like a local Southeast thing. And then next year, there are talks about coming to Europe finally. We got a good European booking agent finally over at Doomstar, and hopefully by next summer we can get there. So it's been it's been a journey in and of itself to try to get over there, but hopefully it'll finally happen. And then that's kind of all that's on the radar right now. Maybe some things like in spring or March of next year might pop up, but we'll see.
Fingers crossed for you, man. I'm really happy to see that progression of the band and your commitment to it. And like you said, hopefully you guys do get to come across to Europe as well. We've only just been able to go and play some of the countries properly just this year, actually, because between us, some of the members of our band weren't able to exit the UK due to some immigration bullshit. But we've just played like Germany like 2 weeks ago. Sorry, about a month or so ago. We've done Romania, we've done Netherlands, and honestly, man, you will fucking love it here. It's so much. It's really cool. Obviously, I'm still yet to experience the States, so that's another thing I'm hoping that I'll be able to do. But fingers crossed, we'll cross paths on one of those, man. And
Sure.
yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks again for having me on, man. It's been awesome.
It's been absolutely my pleasure, and I urge everyone to go and check out your newest record if they haven't done so already, and to obviously come and see you on the shows. Come and support you, obviously, if they're going to the Iwata tour, make sure you show up early enough to see Cloak. And to obviously to everyone listening, then thank you very much for listening so far, and we hope to see you guys on the next episode of Iblis Manifestations. Cheers.
Right. Thanks.